Welcome everyone to another episode of NICTITATIng Presents. My guest today is Kurt Fawver. How you doing?
All right. How about you?
Not bad. Glad that my cat is okay.
I'm glad too. We had to reschedule here. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a whole. I won't go into it. It was an anal gland thing.
I think that's as much as anybody needs to know.
Yeah, it was pretty gross looking. But anyway, so you have a chapbook coming out from Dim Shores,
I do.
which is called "The Man in the High Chair and Other Tyrannies," which it's safe to say it's political genre fiction, correct?
I think it's pretty safe to say that, yes. I intended for it to be fairly political, and it definitely came out that way. And the intention all along, when I was kind of batting it back and forth with Sam Cowan from Dim Shores, was always to have it be something that was political and could connect to the upcoming election. So yeah, it's pretty political.
Yeah, but I enjoyed it immensely. There's enough genre in there that I think well, I hesitate to say people that aren't political because I feel like everyone is political. They just don't know it. But I would say there's enough genre in there that you can enjoy it either way, even if you're not really into politics.
That was my hope, was that, even if you're not like American and following American politics or anything, that you could still find something in there about authoritarianism and totalitarianism and the horrors of capitalism and just, racism. And I would just hope that you could find something in there, these broader issues that kind of plague humanity, to hook into. And again, like you said, it's still very genre, I think. So there's still some weird fiction stuff going on and definitely some horror stuff going on. So
Yeah, there's some interesting takes you have with there's a zombie story. It doesn't really give anything away because it mentions it from the beginning.
yeah.
That deals with essentially racism and police corruption. And actually, my favorite was the one about. Well, I won't go into every single one. I don't want to spoil them, but there was one that dealt with babies that I thought was particularly cutting.
Yeah, my sort of sci-fi, vaguely climate change oriented one. Yeah, that's I had intended for that one to be kind of a play on Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal.
That's what I figured. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's intentionally a little bit over the top, but I still think, like you said, I hope it's cutting. So
No, I enjoyed it. There was a sardonic humor to it, just in a lot of the stories, actually, in terms of the setup, whether they're speeches or press releases or something like that. Actually, I did want to ask you about that. I've noticed with your stories, you like to play around with form. So I noticed when I first read you was in Vastarian, and you had that story that's a play.
hmm
But it's not entirely a play. It sort of, well, plays around with the play format.
I've never been quite sure how to categorize that story. When I first just tried to sell it to to Vastarian, I sent my submission. And I said, "This is a story, sort of. It's also a play, but it's not a play." And so I wasn't sure exactly how to sell that. But everybody seems to like that God's in their seats unblinking. I don't know, something about it seems to work, even though it's not quite a play or not quite a story.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. There's something very strong about it. I couldn't entirely say why. I think something about I don't know.
But yes, to get back to your question, yes, I definitely do. I definitely do like to play with form. I get really bored with too many of the same kind of stories that here we have background and context for our protagonist, and here we have some some introductory paragraphs that just sort of set up the location or the theme of this story, and now we're going to have some rising action, and now we're going to have some falling action, and there's a climax in there where something. I get kind of bored with the traditional 5-part structure of a story. So I do like to play with form a lot. I really do. It's probably one of the reasons why I will never be like a super popular author either, but
Well, I mean, it's a give and take. Yeah, I really like doing that too myself. Same reason. It just, if you've written like 50 short stories or however many, by that point you're like, all right, I understand. I can play around a little bit. Is there any one story from your new chapbook that you enjoy the most? I know that's sort of a polarizing question because some people don't like to play favorites.
Um, I still really like the one that is the title of the chapbook is based on, The Man in the High Chair. That was a story I wrote a while ago. I wrote that not long after Trump was elected,
I
for
mean, I could see that.
yeah, I wrote that not long after Trump was elected for Sam Cowan's, for Dim Shores, also for their Resist and Refuse chapbook that came out.
I was going to ask,
And
were any of those in that?
yeah, that's actually how this whole chapbook came about, was because Sam at Dim Shores, he kept saying he loves that story, he wants to get that story in front of a wider audience, and he couldn't figure out, like, how are we going to get that in front of a wider audience. He was telling me to try to get it with other publishers, and I couldn't really find a good place for it to be reprinted. And then, given that, again, Trump's potentially going to be reelected again, we started thinking about, well, is there something we could do to reprint it with Dim Shores, in some sort of chapbook form? And then I said, yeah, actually, let's just not reprint it by itself. I'll write up, a couple new things to include, and we can have something more substantial to give to readers. So that's how this whole thing came about, is because he loved The Man in the High Chair so much, and I kind of do too, and we wanted to see it hopefully reach a wider audience than it had initially.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about the stories is they work on several levels, but they're also pretty bitingly funny. I don't know if they're intentionally supposed to be that, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that I always get that. I've gotten that same kind of response to my writing a lot, is that my stories always have a humorous edge in them, and I feel like that's just kind of like me. Like, I can't help but be kind of cynical and sarcastic, and a little bit, I don't know, like you said, sardonic. I can't help but be that way. So it comes through in my writing.
I know it is funny though how that works. Like I've had, I won't make this whole thing about me, but I've had people say the same thing. They're like, "Wow, that story you wrote is so funny," and then on my end, I'm like, "You mean the one about like a madness plague?" Then on my end, I'm always like, "There's like one joke in a 20-page story, but for some reason that makes it the funny story."
Yeah, no.
Um, but yeah, I guess I don't know. I guess genre fiction can be very serious, so any type of humor is usually laser focused. People really are drawn to that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
No, no. It's like, I think
Now, I mean, what's the alternative? It's not like I can. It's not like you personally can change your personality. So
no, no. And I feel like, again, a lot of readers kind of connect with that, because if it's too unrelentingly depressing, then you get into Thomas Ligotti kind of territory where nothing means really anything, and we're all just horribly adrift with our consciousness being this burden that we're shackled with, and what's the point of going on? And
it's true, but even with Ligotti, depending on the story, sometimes he
he's
can be
funny.
really funny
Yeah,
too.
exactly. He's
I
sometimes
think that's one that people don't even expect when they go in. They're like, "Why am I laughing so much at conspiracy against the human race?" Maybe not that one,
no.
but
I mean, I love Ligotti. Don't get me wrong, I do. I love Ligotti. But I just used him, as an example of, like, for the super dark, bleak kind of horror.
who would you consider some of your other influences? Although I'm sure they change all the time.
They do change all the time. Definitely, like I said, Ligotti's definitely a big influence. I used to read when I was starting out. I read tons of Clive Barker. His books of blood, I think, are still some of the greatest short stories in horror.
He has
Um,
some new stuff coming out soon.
he does, and all I will say is that I will take that with guarded optimism, because
Right.
I I wasn't a huge fan of the last novel that he wrote.
It just wasn't
The,
very good. Yeah, I'll just say it.
yeah. So I will have guarded optimism about the new stuff that's coming out from him. So yeah, but again, books of blood were foundational. Um, like most people in weird fiction, I had read a lot of Lovecraft back in the day, um, but of course he's obscenely problematic, and he has his obscene racism problems. But he still has kernels of ideas that I think that we still explore and are worth exploring. Um, Apart from that, Shirley Jackson, I love her ability to combine the weirdness of weird fiction with this very subtle social commentary, this very subtle domestic commentary that she kind of imparts to her stories. I think that's kind of what's made her so legendary. What else was I reading a lot when I was coming up? Let's see. More recently, where writer Simon Strancis, he introduced me to Stephen Millhauser, and that was kind of a revelation for me in my writing, because Stephen Millhauser has this really weird way about writing that he includes a lot of first person plural in his stories, and I kind of took to that like a duck to water. Kind of this is the thing that is going to really help my writing grow and expand, because
First person
now
plural, huh?
first person plural, because now I don't have to worry so much about my characters being individual people with a fully developed sense of being, a fully fleshed character. Instead, I can write this kind of more broad social commentary kind of writing, and the first person plural we can be more like, larger groups of individuals that share common characteristics, like the small town folk, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. The final story in Screaming Creatures is first person plural, and I will be. I mean, I never. It's gonna sound really dumb, but I never could pin down. Like, I just would tell people it's we. I don't know, the royal we. Um,
So
yeah, no, it is. It's very liberating, though.
yeah, I really hooked into that, and so Stephen Millhauser really opened my eyes to kind of a new style that I kind of locked into. I love I love Brian Evanson and the kind of weird terseness of what he does, and that his stories are so strange and seem to be withholding some important piece of information from you that you just can't get at. In the same way that kind of Robert Aikman and his stories do the same thing. And Aikman's definitely sort of an influence too, although I don't do the ghostliness the way that Aikman does. The idea that something's being withheld from you, I try to incorporate that, but don't always manage to pull it off. But yeah, anyway, I could sit here probably again the next half hour and keep naming, but yeah, that's just a couple of writers that, either in my more distant past or more recent past have been influential in some
Now,
way.
have you? I know you like to play around with writing various forms or about various types of media. Are you heavily influenced by things like visual mediums?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, since you were talking about playing with forms, I think that anytime I encounter some new form of media, I start thinking about how could I make this into a story? How could this be a story in terms of the form and the structure, and how could I put enough entertaining material into this format to make it into something similar to a story? The other day I was actually sitting around and I know I've seen this somewhere, but I can't recall where. Again, this is the problem with reading too much, is that I know I've seen this, but I was thinking about how would you turn the back of like a label for a piece of for a piece of, oh my god, for a box of cereal or for a food product of some sort. How would you turn the back of a label of that into a story? So I was, anytime I see any kind of new media, whether it be visual or written, I start thinking about how can I turn this into a story? How could this become a story?
Yeah, I mean that is a good question. I don't actually know. But no, that's interesting. That's it's a valuable endeavor. I think people are. I mean, I'll just speak on me. Yeah, I am drawn to that type of mixed media type of playing around with form. I think because it deviates enough that it's interesting while still having the genre, the main genre elements.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of room to experiment with horror and weird fiction. I see, like literary magazines and mainstream literary magazines, I mean, and they take stories sometimes that are really weird and experimental. And I feel like I just never see much of that in horror and weird fiction. I feel like there's some experimenting, there's some experimentalism, but it's been kind of one of my hidden dreams for a while to start something like an experimental horror journal or something. Because I feel like I don't see it, I don't read it that often. Like there's sometimes, sure, but I feel like it's less prevalent. I'm not sure why it's less prevalent in
I mean,
horror or
that's why I
weird
really like
fiction.
people like Matthew Bartlett and Tom Breen, and they're
Oh,
also personal friends, so that helps.
yeah.
But
I mean, Bartlett is. I've said before. I think he's our Sherwood Anderson. With Gateways to Abomination. That's the first thing I ever read of his, and as soon as I read that, I was like, oh my God, he's Sherwood Anderson. He's putting together, these snippets of not quite short stories, not quite a novel that form together to make up one whole story that's almost like a novel, and it's so interesting that playing with form, um, that I loved it immediately. So
yeah, same. And I like that he's constantly trying out new things. Like, oh, this is gonna
hmm
like he has the Anna Gar uh,
hmm
stuff, which is just
hmm
basically like descriptions of books, but then they are a story in themselves.
yeah, yeah.
And same with Tom
I was gonna
Breen.
say
He had
Breen.
Orford
Yep,
Parish, Murder
yep.
Houses.
Which is also great.
That was
No, no, no. You go, you go,
sorry,
you
you
go.
go.
You're the host. You go.
Okay, all right. Yeah, but the Orford Parish Murder Houses was just basically supposed to be like a pamphlet, like a tourism pamphlet, but it's just all about this town where like all these houses had terrible murders in them, and it's very sarcastic. I quite like that one.
No, I like, again, that's exactly the kind of thing. As soon as I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the kind of thing that I wish I had written. So,
I try it out when I can. I've written something in sort of a mock screenplay format for a documentary. It's always interesting trying new things like that, though, because sometimes your first couple attempts, you're like, well, this isn't working. How is this going to work?
yeah, that happens with a lot of things. I find that I have 5 pages of something, and I'm like, wow, where was this ever gonna go? Like, that's a weird experiment, but I don't think this is really gonna work as a story.
Yeah. But no, it's a valuable endeavor. I do want to briefly talk about your other collection, Dissolution of Small Worlds from Lethe Press. What year did that come
hmm
out? That was a couple years ago?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
2018.
Had a chance to read the first story, and I know I've read a couple of the other stories that are in there from various other, I think, where they were published first. I mean, if you can, what would you say is sort of the style of Dissolution of Small Worlds as compared to the new one that's coming out, The Man in the High Chair?
Well, I think it's kind of a progression of my writing style because my very first collection was Forever in Pieces, and that was from Villapede Press in 2013, and that was pretty much all stylistically conventional, and form style was all very much conventional. It was just third person stories with me describing, the characters and trying to set them up in their worlds and all that sort of thing. And I think I was fairly adept at it, and people seem to like it. But then over the intervening 5 years between that one and Dissolution of Small Worlds, I think that this is when the kind of experimental bug really bit me, and I started doing more things with, like you said, style structure, with looking at visual media and other mixed media, and trying to incorporate that into the work that I was doing. And so I think that it's a little bit more, I don't want to say challenging. I don't want to say it's more difficult to get into, but I think it is in some ways. I also think that because of that, it's a little bit more heady in terms of, if you're a casual horror reader, you're probably going to come to Dissolution and say, I don't know that I like this. I don't know that I'm getting it. Um, in fact, I had one review of Dissolution. I still remember it. It said something like, if you're looking for conventional, normal ways of understanding horror, this isn't it. But this is a bold new take on the future of horror, or something like that. And I was like, okay, all right, this reviewer, I think, maybe gets what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I mean, I feel like Dissolution, I was trying to push forward into a newer style. I also included a lot of the first person plural kinds of stories in Dissolution, so I was once again beginning to experiment with that form of storytelling.
I mean, I really like that first, the opener, and I'm blanking on the title now. I'm sorry, but
The Myth of You.
yeah, the Myth of You, and
Yep.
it sort of starts, and you think it's almost like a lecture, like a classroom kind of lecture or an essay,
Hmm.
and then it pulls back, and it's weird fiction story, horror story, and then it kind of has interstitial essay format stuff like, well, look at what we just did here, like, and this, maybe we could go here with it. And I thought it was very clever, and I enjoyed it. It adds a weird flavor to it. Uh, yeah, I've enjoyed all your work.
Thank you. But yeah, Myth of You, yeah, it's definitely a story that,
I mean, it's challenging for a number, like just the story part, that other than the essay part, is like,
yes, it doesn't really have, it doesn't really have a central character. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. And it has so many shifting perspectives. And like you said, then I have this kind of like essay writer person that's kind of like sitting back looking at the whole story of that's being told.
it reminded me in a way of Notes on a Horror Story, the
Hmm.
Legati
Yeah.
story, in terms of just there is a story, but then there's also a more or less a narrator talking about the story as the story is occurring.
Yeah. And I love metafiction with a passion. And I have tried my hand at it, and I think this is one of the times when I was intentionally trying my hand at it again. But it's really, I feel like it's really hard to pull off metafiction that works for people. And not only that works for people, but that just works within a story, because either it comes off as being overly pretentious, or it comes off as being uh, too self-effacing, and it's humorous or parodic. So I feel like it's kind of hard to pull off good metafiction, although I do love it, like I said.
I think it is, yeah. I know personally I do it, and I just feel like, wow, I'm the most narcissistic person on earth. I'm writing a story about myself. Like, so it's around the 30-minute mark, but I do want to ask you, maybe another 5 minutes. Have you ever, so obviously you write short stories. Have you ever thought about writing a novel or tried to write a novel
Well,
or anything longer, like
yes,
novella territory?
yes. I do have one novella. It came out from Dunham's Manor Press back in 2015. It's called Burning Witches, Burning Angels, and that's probably, it's the longest finished piece I think I've ever written. It's also very conventional in a lot of ways. But yes, I did write one novella. And actually, when I first started writing seriously again, I wrote kind of like as an amateur, just kind of on a lark when I was a teenager and when I was younger and in college and into my 20s. And then toward the end of my 20s, when I started going back to to grad school, and I was like, you know what, I want to write seriously. I started writing a novel, and it was a super experimental novel, like just ridiculously experimental. It had four different narrators at four different time periods. It had, like you said, mixed media in it. It was just crazy experimental. And I got to about 45,000 words, and I realized this isn't working. This doesn't work. Um, and so
That is always the risk you take, and when it's in the shorter form, you're like, oh well, I spent a couple weeks or a
yeah, I
month.
worked on it for like 2 years, and I was like, oh my God,
Yeah, that
this
sounds
doesn't
about
work.
right.
And so what I've done, but there were like really good pieces in there. So what I've done with it is I kind of stripped it down. And since then, I've kind of, over the last like 10 years, I've kind of like been building around various pieces of it again. To the point where I have it up to about 30,000 words again. And it's just kind of always sitting on
All
my
right.
computer, just like, what am I going to do with this? I don't know. I don't know. Should I continue and try to draw this out into a novel? Should I see if it can get to novella length? I mean, it already is novella length, but should I see where it goes? It's just kind of sitting here, and like I said, it's about 30,000, so it wouldn't take that much more to turn it into a novel. But I I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with it. So yes, I have tried longer work.
I always like to ask people that are primarily known as short story writers because I think there's maybe simplifying it a little bit, but it seems like there's two camps. There's the people that are like, I write short stories and I just like writing short stories and I'm never going to do a novel, which I respect. But, then there's the other side, which is like, I'd like to write a novel, but God, how do you write a novel? Which is, I think, more
That's
where I'm at. Even though I've written a novel, I still feel like, how do you write a novel?
yeah. I mean, you've written long work, so no, you know how it goes.
Oh yeah, no, I mean like for every one novel, like for the one novel I put out, it had to be like a full novel that I trunked, and then a half a novel I attempted and put away, and then like two or three novellas before I was comfortable enough to be like, okay, this one is like good enough that I can put it out.
Yeah, I like I feel like I should try to finish this longer piece because I think that a lot of people don't read short stories, unfortunately. I don't.
Yeah, it's sort of it's tough because I do feel like I love short stories. They're
So do I.
probably my favorite. Sometimes I have trouble with novels too, just in terms of the length. And yeah, I mean, like we were talking about, like they tend to not be as experimental because it is such a longer. And I understand why it would be more straightforward because you gotta, propel people through this page length. But it is, yeah. So you go into short story writing basically knowing, like, so not as many people are going to read this. And if I did a novel, hypothetically, more people would see it. But then you're like, well, then I have to write a novel, and how do you do that and all that?
Exactly. And then once you write your first novel, and if people actually do go read it, and they're like, yeah, no, I like this. When are you writing your next novel? And it's like, oh no, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah, I wrote my first novel, and halfway through, this terrible voice in my head was like, "This is a trilogy," and it was like, I was so sad. Like, it's not like I was like, "Yes," like I was just super bummed out. I'm like, "Oh my God, 3 books? Like I can barely write one book."
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of
So it's gonna be this weird trilogy that takes place probably over the next 20 years.
yeah. That's how I
Every
feel.
10 years I'll be like, and it's about like technology too, so it's like, oh good, I wrote myself into a weird corner where I have to figure out my workaround
Well,
too.
then it's also historical fiction at some point. So there you go.
Yeah, it'll have to be historical fiction.
But yeah, no, like long work. And that's another problem is like just the time that you have to put into it. I'm like, oh, well, if I start writing novels, then, well, at the rate I write short stories, I guess I'll get a novel out, once every 5 years or so. So,
Yeah, I don't know that people that don't write or casual, like very casual readers that are just like, oh, there's a New York Times bestselling whatever, I'll go read that. I don't think they realize like could be like 3 or 4 years just for the one, and they're like, when's the new one? You're like, really? Like,
yeah, I don't know. I guess unless you're Stephen King and you can chop out 20,000 words a day, I don't know.
yeah, I don't know how. Well, I mean, I do know how he does it. I don't want to disparage him because I do like his work, and but like people like that, you do get the sense sometimes you read some of their novels and you're like, so you just don't really care if they're that great? I mean, and that's just, I think, the word length too is like, if you're writing that
Yeah.
much, at some point it's not going to be good, and you're just like, I'm going anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you're pointing at the great Stephen King conundrum that, I mean, the man's written so much that he has so much brilliant stuff, but then there's also a lot of stuff that's maybe not the greatest.
Yeah, I mean, you can have, there are the people that are like, I write a novel every 10 years and it tends to be good, and you're like, oh wow. And then there are the people that do, I don't know, like two novels a year for like 20 years. And inevitably, you'll get the ones that are good, but then, I mean, it's like anything, Sometimes you write a short story and it's not good. It's just when it's novel length, it's so much time
Exactly.
that I understand why people will still put them out.
It feels like such a massive investment if you write a novel and it's just not good or it fails.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel bad, like we were talking about Clive Barker, and Scarlet Gospels, like, oh, I just feel like that was a perfect storm of like things that went wrong for him. Um, because in his personal life, like he was getting divorced, and then he literally was in a coma. Um, and just all of this extra crap that like people don't even think about because they just think of writer as just this thing that writes. Sometimes when it's like, no, there's a lot of personal stuff that gets in the way too, and it will affect the outcome of the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah,
And then just like I got the sense, I don't want to go into it too much, but I got the sense that he was sort of just writing it like that he just was writing about Pinhead again just because Pinhead was popular.
kind of. I got that kind of sense too.
Like he didn't like he sort of wanted to write about it, but not like it's really a Harry D. Moore novel, like more than a Pinhead novel.
And like you were saying, like with his personal life, like I felt like even stylistically, it didn't feel like his work. Like it felt hollow in some way.
I mean, I don't want to go into this too much either, but I have wondered since he was in such poor health if maybe someone else didn't maybe help him out with it.
I've actually read that. Yeah, I've read speculation about that online.
It would probably be maybe the guy that was helping him with the comics. But I mean, I don't know that for a fact, and I don't want to speculate. That's
No,
kind of shitty.
no, but yeah, like no, something like that. Like again, he's written so many brilliant things in the past. Like his novels too. Hellbound Heart is amazing, and people talk about Weave Worlds being amazing. I agree, it's amazing. He's written so many incredible novels in the past. Sacrament, um, that novel just didn't. Again, it just didn't feel the same, and I think that's exactly the danger we were talking about with like feeling like you have to produce a new novel. Like, what if it's just something you don't have your heart in, or you don't have your mind in, and you get it out there, and like, what do your readers think then? It's like us talking about it right now. Like, what happened?
Yeah, no, I don't. Just give me 1 second. I'll let my dumb cat in. Come on, kitty. At this point, this is just part of the podcast. The time I have to let my cat in.
It's all right.
Um, but yeah, no, I mean, it's a whole different thing. And then you get into the financial side of it too, where if you're a short story writer and people know you from that, like, yeah, no, it's you do get to a point where you can sort of, I can make X amount of money if I write a story and sell it, like at pro rates or even for a flat rate of however much, as compared to, well, I could make much more money if I had a novel that takes off, but like it's like anything where you don't know. But anyway, yeah, so we're at the 40-minute mark. I do every interview, even when it doesn't feel appropriate. I do something known as I have done something known as a random ass interview where I ask essentially random questions I make up off the top of my head. So I'm going to do that now, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
As stated before, I do make these up on the spot, so they're not, I don't know how good they're always going to be.
Okay.
They tend to be about food for some reason.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I have that minute where I'm like, how do I actually, do you drink coffee?
I do. I used to drink my coffee pretty much straight up black. Then because I have some anxiety problems, I realized that kind of exacerbated them, so I switched to decaf. So now I drink decaf mostly. But yes, I do drink coffee.
If your decaf coffee had a personality and began to talk one day, what do you think it would speak? How do you think it would speak?
I don't know. I think it might have a British gentleman's accent, just because I like giving British gentleman accents to things. I think it's funny in some way. I don't know. I think
No,
that the erudite British gentleman is a funny accent, so I
especially if
would
it's
kind
your
of
cup of coffee. Yeah, I
exactly.
just realized
Yeah,
that you can go, no pun intended, very dark with that too, where it's like,
you
please don't
could.
drink me.
You
So yeah,
could.
now that my cat is breaking in and there's a dog barking, I think it's time to end this interview.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming on, and I apologize for us having to reschedule.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Blame this one over here for that.
No problem at all. It's always good to talk and always good to to bat around some of these kinds of questions and ideas that are
Yeah, no, I think it's important to talk with other artists,
hmm
just in general, because it can be a very lonely process, especially with writing, where you are spending so much time just like alone. So provides a sense of community. But so if there's anything you want to plug, I suppose the Dim Shores chapbook.
Yeah, my Dim Shores chapbook, The Men in the High Castle and Other Tyrannies, that's going to be coming from Dim Shores. I have a full collection coming next year from Grimscribe. We Are Happy, We Are Doomed. Then I have a short story coming out in Nightmare in November, and that's gonna be, we were talking about like weird mixed media. That's gonna be another one that's kind of strange and unorthodox. And then I've been sitting on this for a while, but my story that was printed in Shadows and Tall Tales 8, which came out this year, called Workday, that's going to be turned into a pseudopod episode around Christmas, and they're doing a full cast reading of it because again, it's one of those weird mixed media things. So like, there's a ton of different perspectives and voices in there, and so they're doing a full cast reading of that for a Christmas episode because it's Christmas themed. So so that'll be on Pseudopod around Christmas, hopefully.
Well, that's cool. Nice. Well, again, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, I
Seems like the
hope.
future's very
I don't
bright for
know.
you.
Sometimes it looks pretty dim. Exactly.
Hopefully. I mean, if we don't all get nuked or something. But anyway, so my full-length collection, Screaming Creatures, is available from Nictitating Books. It's currently on Amazon. If you like it, please leave a Amazon or Goodreads review. It really helps. And in the coming months, we will see a novelette from Paula Ashe and a novella from Maxwell Bauman and many other things whenever I figure out how to pay for them. And stick around because we're going to have a lot more interviews in store. So yeah, that's about it. It's been good talking with you, Kurt.
It's been good talking with you too.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem.